Just going to wait for the go ahead that we're live on Facebook, and then we'll get started. All right, and we are live. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for our weekly tour of our collection. You know, we wish we could meet in person, but we're happy to be able to connect with you virtually during these times. Kind of an exciting tour today that we have for you, celebrating Women's History Month. So for those of you who aren't aware, March is Women's History Month, and so we'll be looking at some portraits of women from our collection. Before we begin, I just want to go over a couple of guidelines. So if you're here in our Zoom room, we ask that you mute yourself for the duration of the tour, just so there's no kind of overlapping noises. Everyone can hear our docent. If you have any questions or comments during the tour, you can go ahead and put them in the chat. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, there's a speech bubble and it says chat, and you can put any questions or comments there. And then at the end of the tour, we'll have a little conversation and we can address those and have a little chat. If you're joining us from Facebook, welcome to you as well. You can also join the conversation by adding your comments or questions in the comment section below the video, and we'll be monitoring that so we can bring you into the conversation in our Zoom room. All right, well, with that, I'd like to introduce our docent for the day. So Eleanor Merle, who has really been great with our virtual tours. We are so appreciative of her willingness to step up and kind of tackle this virtual platform. So thank you so much, Eleanor. And she will be presenting, as I said, Portraits of Women at the Timken Museum, a celebration of Women's History Month. Take it away, Eleanor.
Thank you, Allison. Good morning, greetings, and welcome to a tour of Masterpieces of the Timken Museum. As Allison said, my name is Eleanor Merle, and I'm delighted to be your docent for today's tour. Today, we'll be taking a look at portraits of women, each telling a fascinating story reflecting the historical, cultural, and social context within which it was created. I'd be remiss in a discussion of portraits of women in the Timken if I failed to mention the Putnam sisters, whose collection the museum holds. Anne and Amy Putnam lived at the turn of the 20th century in San Diego, having moved here with their father in their 30s from Bennington, Vermont. They followed their father's brother, Henry, a successful businessman. The sisters obtained the majority of their wealth, about $5 million, as the beneficiaries of Henry's only son, Willie, when his estate was settled in 1938. By the mid-1920s, the sisters were collecting great masters, and during the 1940s, giving them anonymously to the San Diego Museum of Art. But in the late 1940s, the museum's first director, Reginald Porter, fell out of favor with Amy, and the sisters stopped donating artworks to the museum. Instead, they traveled on loan to various museums throughout the country. In 1950, with the guidance of their lawyer and friend, Walter Ames, the sisters established the nonprofit Putnam Foundation, which became the principal beneficiary of their estates. With additional funding from the Timken family and its foundation, the museum was built and opened to the public in October 1965, the only museum in Balboa Park free at all times to the public. So let's now turn to our portraits. In the ancient world, female portraits were primarily commissioned for highly elite women. We see here a marble portrait of Livia from 9 BCE. She was the wife of the Roman Emperor Augustus. The relief is part of the Altar of Augustan Peace in Rome, part of a larger complex of Augustan monuments advertising the fact that he has restored peace to the Roman state after a long period of internal and external turmoil. Livia's serene expression, idealized beauty, naturalistic features, and complex drapery are all inspired by depictions of goddesses in classical Greek sculpture. Now, with the collapse of Roman civilization, portraiture in Western Europe essentially disappeared. It's been suggested that physical appearance was not a particularly important element of self-image or even a primary means of identification in the Middle Ages. Station in life, family, and local affiliations, occupation, these were how people knew themselves and others. So here we have a mosaic dating from 547 CE of Empress Theodora, the powerful wife of Byzantine Emperor Justinian. Her elite status is signified by her elaborate jewelry and headdress. Stylistically, this is much more abstracted than the portrait of Livia. Theodora's flat frontal pose is much less dynamic and naturalistic, and her large, overly rounded eyes gaze unfocused toward the viewer, out of proportion with the rest of her face. The work sits on the wall of the Basilica of San Vitale in Ravenna, Italy, a church commissioned by Theodora and her husband, who also has a portrait there. She was probably the most powerful woman in Byzantine history. Her intelligence and political acumen made her Justinian's most trusted advisor and enabled her to use the power and influence of her office to promote religious and social policies that favored her interests. By the 15th century, 1,000 years after the fall of ancient Rome, notions about identity and the individual had changed. After many centuries in which generic representation had been the norm, distinctive portrait likenesses began to reappear, reflecting a manifestation of Renaissance humanism with its emphasis on the individual and their place in the world. For the first time, portraiture emerged as a distinct artistic genre. Now, initially, portraiture was reserved for the aristocracy and the clergy, and artists in the period depicted their sitters rigidly, full-faced, or in profile from a single point of view, with little or no attention to personality. Here's such a work by Hans Memling, a double portrait of Tommaso da Falco Portinari and Maria Portinari from 1470. The Florentine Tommaso Portinari was the branch manager of the Medici Bank in Bruges and probably commissioned these portraits from Memling upon the couple's marriage in 1470. They originally formed a triptych with a central devotional image of the Virgin and Child to whom the couple are praying. Beyond demonstrating the couple's piety, Maria's elaborate necklace and gown display their wealth and social status. A hypothetical reconstruction of the portraits as the original triptych is in the National Gallery of Art. Notice how Memling places the sitters before illusionistic frames, an innovation suggesting that the figures project into our space. In addition to commemorative and celebratory portraits, we had donor portraits, common in religious works of art of the Middle Ages into the Renaissance. They showed the person or persons who commissioned and paid for their images to be included as part of the larger painting. And here's a triptych from our collection entitled Virgin of Sorrows with Donors, which includes portraits of the donors standing in prayer to the central image of the Virgin. The painting was done around 1564 by a Flemish artist named Pieter Claessens. The center panel depicts a tearful Virgin with the seven sorrows, key events from her life represented by swords arrayed halo-like around her head. On the side panels are portraits of a family, probably Spanish, who commissioned the painting. One panel has the father, and the lettering underneath lists his age as 50, and 3 sons. The other has the mother, age 49, and 2 daughters. They're dressed in black and praying. The piece was probably done for the altar of the family's chapel. The wings were hinged so they could be closed or open at certain times during the year. Now, appearing toward the end of the 15th century were radical innovations, including gently animating poses, subtle modeling, and keenly observed human expression that fostered a realism that was revolutionary at the time. Fueled by new techniques in oil painting, they brought character and naturalism to painted portraits and freed Italian artists from formulaic representation. The new approach appealed greatly to both the nobility and the emerging middle class and dramatically expanded the market for portraiture. Increasingly, painters strove to convey not simply physical appearance, but personality and character as well. What Leonardo da Vinci called, and I quote, the motions of the mind, end quote. This brings us to the Italian gallery and portrait of a lady in a green dress from 1530 by the artist Bartolomeo Veneto. We see here an intriguing young woman from 16th century Venice, whom we call Portrait of a Lady in a Green Dress. It was painted in 1530 by Bartolomeo Veneto, and we know this because he signed his name on the small, curly piece of paper to the sitter's right called a cartellino. It's a trompe l'oeil looking like a label you can just peel off the painting. This dazzling portrait portrays a woman emerging from a dark background in opulent, self-possessed splendor. She's dressed in the height of fashion for the time, wearing a luxuriant dress of green silk, marked at the waist with a violet-colored belt, a shimmering gold blouse or fichu, and a long necklace of semi-precious stones. Now, notice those ample and puffy green sleeves. They're tied on separately and they're slashed so she can pull out tufts of her undergarment and show us that she's rich and sophisticated enough to own underwear. And while she probably owned only 2 or 3 bodice tops and skirts, she may have had 10 pairs of sleeves so she could mix and match them to get lots of different looks. A bit unusual are her brown leather gloves. They're rather heavy looking for her outfit. They don't quite fit the portrait. Perhaps they were used for hawking. And if so, wearing the glove on her right hand would tell us she's left-handed. Notice her elaborate headpiece of human hair. It's called the scuffia, and it's adorned with blue and gold ribbon and a white rosette attached to the center with a jeweled pin. She has lovely Titian, ginger reddish hair, likely dyed with henna, and Venetian ladies prized hair of this color at the time. Bartolomeo intrigues us with hints of the lady's personality, with a piercing, wary, slightly petulant expression. She turns her head as if she just notices we're here. Such subtle animation was groundbreaking at the time, revealing an interest in human emotion, drama, and naturalism. Now, the identity of Our Lady in the Green Dress was a mystery until recently, when a PhD candidate at UCSD conducted research and has offered evidence that this young woman may be Maria Paleologo, who was engaged to be married to the son of Isabella d'Este, the Marquesa of Mantua. And the Marquesa was a famous fashion leader and patron of the arts. So as such, this portrait may have been done to commemorate her marriage. Sadly, she was poisoned just before her marriage date, but all was not lost, as she had a sister who ended up marrying the Marquesa's son. Now, what is the link to the identification? How do we know this is Maria Paleologo? Well, the link is the ornamental headdress. Take a look at this portrait by Titian, and it's of the Marquesa wearing the same headdress. And what we now understand is that upon joining the family, the Marchesa would give the bride a headdress to welcome her into the family and identify her, as part of the family. And that's how we know them and have solved the mystery of who the lady in the green dress is. By the way, that little cartolino, which gave us the name of Bartolomeo Veneto, helped us identify further paintings by the artists who had been somewhat unknown, until probably the 19th century. We'll now head to the Dutch and Flemish Gallery in a portrait of Mary Villiers, Lady Herbert of Shirley from 1636. Anthony van Dyck painted this portrait of Mary Villiers around 1636, shortly after the death of her first husband, Lord Herbert of Shirley. Though she was only 14 years old at the time, she emerges from the plain, dark background in dignified splendor, pointing with her left hand in a traditional gesture of sincerity and affection to one of the black ribbons that suggests her recent widowhood. With her right hand, she holds an inverted Provence rose, almost certainly signifying that the life of her beloved, has been snuffed out well before his time. Her stylish reddish-brown S-curled ringlets frame her refined features, while drop pearl earrings and a pearl necklace emphasize both her physical and moral purity. She wears the latest fashion, a glowing low-cut taffeta gown trimmed with silvery lace. Now, Mary was a favorite of King James I of England, and after her father's assassination when she was 6, she was raised in the royal household, where she enjoyed the status of a princess. Charles I, the son of King James, arranged her marriage at age 12 to Charles Lord Herbert, who was then 15, the oldest son of Lord Pembroke, a man of considerable fortune and one of Van Dyck's earliest patrons. Tragically, Lord Herbert died of smallpox just 2 years later, which is when this portrait was commissioned by Charles, who hung it in his chamber. In the same year, Van Dyck painted a portrait of Queen Henrietta Maria, wife of King Charles I. She appears to be wearing the same pearl earrings and necklace as Mary Villiers and a similar dress, also with the black ribbon of mourning. Mary Villiers was her lady of the bedchamber and accompanied the French-born queen back to France when the English Civil War broke out. Now, the artist had known Mary since at least 1633 and had painted her portrait in addition to other family portraits on several occasions. Here's one of her with her lady's maid, Anne Shepherd, from 1638. Sadly, Lady Mary Villiers' string of losses didn't end with the death of her father and her first husband. 2 subsequent husbands predeceased her, as did both her children at age 10 and 18. Now, Anthony van Dyck, a Flemish Baroque artist, was born in 1599 in Antwerp to a wealthy silk merchant. He was a very talented, precocious painter who started his training at age 10 and became an independent artist at age 16. By 1618, he'd become a master in the Antwerp Guild of St. Luke. He was invited in 1632 to the court of King Charles and Queen Henrietta Maria, and that same year he became the principal painter to their majesties, who commissioned numerous portraits from him, not only for members of their own family, but also for foreign friends and ambassadors. Everyone wanted to be painted by Van Dyck, who was one of the first fashionable portrait painters, able to give an appearance of refined elegance to subjects who lacked those qualities. He was also well known for his many self-portraits, through which viewers were exposed to his unique style. He was capable of influencing 17th century Englishmen into adopting his mannerisms and outward appearance. Specifically, he was known for wearing his facial hair in a particular way and would later popularize the look by painting his various models with the same beard. The style, known as the Van Dyke beard, came to consist of a mustache and goatee with the hair on the cheeks completely shaven. A flamboyant individual, he always wore a sunflower to please King Charles, who greatly admired that flower. So let's stay in the Netherlands a bit longer and take a look at another artist in high demand, Nicholas Mays and his Portrait of a Lady from 1677 in our galleries. Nicholas Mays was Rembrandt's best-known pupil, studying with him in Amsterdam between 1648 and 54. Mays is best known for his anecdotal genre scenes, but in the 1660s, he began dedicating himself exclusively to painting portraits. His work was in high demand. Often there was vying among customers to be put at the head of the list. In this portrait, we observe a seated young woman who appears to be a lady of great wealth and refinement, as indicated by her rich, shimmering satin gown, fat pearl necklace and brooch, her hands resting on a rich, deep red cloth hanging over the table. Her right arm nestles a King Charles Spaniel, a dog somewhat favored in European paintings due to it being linked to the English royalty in the time of Queen Mary I, when they were made famous by their association with King Charles II. Her pose is friendly yet dignified, what we would call an elegant demeanor, with an open gaze at the viewer. Mays, employing chiaroscuro, leads the viewer in a diagonal flow of red color up to her face, which is pale. She had porcelain skin. So who is the sitter? Well, this portrait may depict 15-year-old Mary Stuart, daughter of James, Duke of York, and Anne Hyde, during the year she married her Protestant first cousin, Prince William of Orange, Stadtholder of Holland. She later became Mary II, Queen of England, Scotland, and Ireland when her father was deposed, co-reigning with her husband from 1689 until her death 5 years later in 1694 at age 32 from smallpox. William reigned for an additional 5 years until his death. She was a very capable ruler with considerable ability displayed during her husband's frequent absences. During her co-reign, one of the most important constitutional documents in English history, the Bill of Rights, was passed by Parliament in December 1689, establishing restrictions on the royal prerogative. Also during her reign was the endowment in 1693 of the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia, the second oldest college in the United States. While scholars are on the fence as to whether this truly is Mary, the Timken's most recent research in 1996 concluded that she was. We're now ready to move into the 18th century in France and two portraits by Nicolas de la Gellière, the go-to artist for the nobility. If you were somebody in early 18th century France, you definitely wanted to have your likeness painted by an important artist. Portraits counted among essential decor in France's elite households as proof of noble lineage and evidence of high social standing. Should you happen to be in Paris and not a member of the royal family, it would have been in your best interest to approach Nicolas de la Gellière for this task. Lauderdale's solid academic training meant that he was skilled at depicting courtiers in environments that communicated their prosperity and prestige. Lauderdale was pivotal in the transition from the Baroque to the Rococo portrait style during the reigns of Louis XIV and XV. He had a large, very prolific workshop that produced over 1,500 portraits. These two grand portraits are among Laudelaire's masterpieces, demonstrating years of the artist refining his skills and perfecting his talents. They were commissioned when Laudelaire was 73 years old and still at the pinnacle of his career. We have in these portraits a lovely, somewhat royal depiction of Mr. and Mrs. Pupil. Monsieur Pupil opted to be portrayed in a relaxed yet professionally determined demeanor, wearing a long powdered wig known as a peruke and dressed in black satin judicial robes with a red cape. He gazes back at the viewer with impartiality and quiet confidence. Pupil's right hand rests casually on a large leather-bound volume with more great tomes behind him, partly hidden by elegant drapery. Possibly this was his law library. Pupil had several years earlier married his social superior, Marguerite de Sèvres. As a consequence of that marriage, he was awarded a series of increasingly prestigious legal appointments in Lyon. His expression exudes a self of well-nourished satisfaction that we might expect of a man at the summit of his profession. Now, as a trivia note, wigs for men became popular during the reign of King Louis XIII, the early 17th century. He pioneered the fashion in 1624 when he became prematurely bald. They were promoted by Louis XIV and spread to other European countries. Wig styles were defined by social status and standing, and generally the higher a wig, the bigger a wig, the higher in stature the man wearing it, hence the term big wig. So turning to Marguerite de Sèvres, she came, as we mentioned, from a Lyonese family whose importance is suggested by her regal bearing and her expression of confidence. Indeed, the setting and props were called contemporary royal portraiture. The wall behind her is covered in expensive blue damask or flocking, Baroque in style. Her fur-trimmed, shimmering red robes evoke royal velvet and ermine, and her powdered hair ornaments hint at a tiara. Note that women did not wear wigs, but rather they powdered their hair gray. She wears an extraordinary embossed and jeweled gilded bodice, a common prop during the 18th century, to pay homage to the ancient world as well as to attribute qualities of a god or goddess to the subject herself. Madame's bodice suggests the armor of Minerva, the Roman goddess of wisdom. Freshly cut carnations burst from the top of the bodice. So heavy jewelry was not typically worn during this period, but you do have these flowers, for example. She has sprigs of flowers in her hair also and wields a silver fan in her hand. The whole lavish costume may have been constructed on the spot from props in the artist's studio. We know that Laudelaire was the owner of this carved and painted harpsichord. Interestingly, the music on the keyboard instrument has 6 rather than 5 stave lines, indicating its music intended to be played on a stringed instrument such as a lute or a theorbo and not on a keyboard instrument. So that's a bit of an anomaly. Underneath, clearly legible, are the words of a drinking song that comes from Molière's The Bourgeois gentilhomme. A note back on fans. The fan, which Madame de Sèvres holds furled in her right hand, was an important accessory in 18th century France. It might be used to peek at a particular gentleman, carried in such a way to indicate they were married or single, or when closed, used to tap someone on the shoulder if they wished to talk with them. Let's now move on to the American gallery, the last gallery in our tour, to admire a wonderful portrait of an elegant colonial lady shrouded in a bit of mystery. The year is 1771 and the location is New York City. The sitter is Margaret Kemble Gage, wife of General Thomas Gage, Commander-in-Chief of the British forces in America. And the painter is John Singleton Copley of Boston, colonial America's most influential painter, who'd come to New York City to paint the A-listers, the society ladies of the time. And here's a portrait of General Gage that Copley painted 3 years earlier. He's presented as an affable and distinguished gentleman. The son of Irish immigrants living in Boston and largely self-taught, Copley was determined and ambitious. By the time he was 20, he'd become colonial Boston's leading portrait painter and the first American painter to live in a style and earn a social status comparable to that of his patrons. Copley's tremendous success was rooted in his ability to appeal to his sitters' desire to be portrayed on a par with their English counterparts. And what was quite the rage at this time was Turkery, to be dressed in the Turkish style. People were enamored by the Ottoman Empire. As an officer's wife, Mrs. Gage was one of the most prominent women in the region. Known throughout the Middle Colonies for her charming manner, she may have been the most socially prominent woman in New York at the time, certainly one of the most engaging. She was a third-generation American, considered a beauty. The British soldiers referred to her as Duchess, so she was indeed colonial royalty. So in this 3/4 length portrait, we see a relaxed, serene, and confident woman seated languidly on a dark blue velvet sofa, her curved right arm and hand supporting her head. She's depicted wearing an uncorseted, iridescent rose caftan, loosely closed over a cream lace-trimmed chemise. A deep red jewel is at her bosom and an embroidered dark blue belt at her waist. Clearly, this was not your standard colonial costume. Around her neck are 2 strands of delicate miniature pearls. Larger pearls are wrapped around her left elbow and entwined in her Turkish-styled headscarf. The tasseled scarf is embroidered in the same dark blue and gold fabric as her belt. Her long hair is piled high on her head, falling over her right shoulder. Copley was particularly pleased with this portrait, writing, and I quote, "It is, I think, beyond compare, the best lady's portrait I ever drew," end quote. Upon completion, he sent it to London for exhibition, after which it hung in Firle Place, the Gage family home, until it was purchased by the Putnam Foundation. Now here's a portrait of Mrs. Joseph Hooper, also done in 1771. She and her husband lived in Marblehead, Massachusetts, newly rich members of the merchant class. She's portrayed as a woman who's calm, rational, and prosperous, quite a different portrayal from Mrs. Gage. Notice that she's wearing the same dress as Mrs. Gage, perhaps confirming that Copley supplied the prop, the dress. He also supplied the couch that Mrs. Gage sat in. In 1774, Copley, who'd returned to Boston, finally fulfilled his wish to study the great works of art and left Boston to take his long for European grand tour. He never returned home. As for Mrs. Gage, we have an unsolved mystery. Was she a colonial informant? General Gage had secret plans to destroy the Patriot armories in Lexington and Concord and to place the key leaders into custody. An informant who was connected to the British High Command alerted the Patriots, perhaps his American-born wife. She was a third-generation American, so there might have been some motive there. While there's no proof of her complicity, it's revealing that Mrs. Gage and her 10 children were sent to England shortly after this, April 1775, supposedly to tend to the family estate. General Gage was recalled later that year. We don't know what the relationship was between the two of them after this point. They moved with 10 children and they did have an 11th child. So presumably they worked out any problems between them, based on perhaps her complicity with the Patriots. Our tour has now come to a close. I know it's been quite a whirlwind run through our galleries and hope you enjoyed hearing the stories our women have to tell. Thank you.
Thank you, Eleanor. I'll give her a virtual round of applause. Thank you so much for kind of leading us through history there. And I love seeing how, in every different age we see these kind of powerful women, and it's really so illuminating to learn about them through their artwork, because a lot of times, maybe in historical texts, we don't always get the full picture. So it's great seeing a little bit more insight through our paintings and depictions of them and all the little details we can kind of find. I want to open it up now to any questions or comments from our audience. As I mentioned before, if you're on Facebook, you can also put your comments in the chat underneath the video on Facebook, and I'm happy to facilitate. So if anyone wants to unmute themselves here, they can do so. We did have a couple of just nice comments, so some thank yous, and yeah, also someone mentioned kind of, comparing and contrasting images at the same time. And I think that's also kind of interesting when we look at different countries and different traditions kind of, and seeing how there's some overlap. Because some of these are in similar time periods, but different countries, right?
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting to see, particularly in the 15th and 16th century, the dramatic change. In the Middle Ages, you have these frontal facing, large-eyed, definitely unrealistic, individuals where personality just wasn't important. And then there's another portrait in our gallery of Baltrafio, by Baltrafio, done just 30 years before the lady in the green dress. And it's a very idealistic portrait, very Leonardo da Vinci-like. And just 30 years later, you have Lady with the Green Dress, which is a very expressive portrait.
Yeah, so seeing kind of how trends develop also in often short periods of time. Yeah, it's really interesting. Any other questions or comments from our audience here? We did have a comment from Facebook just saying that it would also be interesting to compare these with sort of current portraits that we have.
Mm-hmm.
I remember the big one they mentioned also of Michelle Obama, that was
yes.
of her. And so interesting to kind of compare, because I remember in that one, there's sort of these stylistic conventions that we see similarities, throughout, but of course they kind of put a contemporary spin on it.
Yeah, that's true. It's and those would be good ones to look at. They are very avant-garde portraits.
Yeah, but there's kind of still some similarities where she's and kind of looking right at the viewer, and yeah, exactly. We had another question. Did any artists ever do a portrait of the Putnam sisters? Did they ever commission a painted portrait of themselves?
I'm not aware of any. I don't know, Allison, if you are.
Yeah, I don't think so. Not that I can think of either. I guess they were more interested in or other people.
They were really focused on European art. And in fact, they really did not collect American art. You know, the pieces in our American collection date from after the Putnam sisters, you know, had passed away. So they were just very focused on the European great masters.
Yeah, and especially, I mean, the Russian icons too.
And the Russian icons.
Yeah, a bit of a more kind of historical look. Yeah, we do have some photographs, but yeah, I'm not sure of any paintings. Any other questions or comments from our audience on either Zoom or Facebook? Again, you can unmute yourself if you're here on Zoom. No?
Well, thank you. I appreciate your comments and very much enjoyed. I do see a question. Lady in the green dress was poisoned. Could you expand? We don't really know. That is a mystery, another mystery. We don't really know if that was kind of by, you know, accidentally, or if in fact she was poisoned by someone else, you know, but it was right before her marriage. It's a bit, you know, it's a bit compelling to think someone poisoned her. I hate to think it was her sister who ended up marrying, you know, Frederica de Gonzaga, but her sister did end up marrying her. So that is still a mystery.
Oh, wow. That is, yeah, suspicious for sure.
Yeah, suspicious. Thank you.
And then, oh, one more question from Facebook. Were the Putnams friends with the Marstons, who were another San Diego family? I don't know if you're
because of the Marston House. I don't, yeah, I'm familiar with the Marston House. I really don't know. You know, don't have the answer to that. I don't know if someone else might.
Someone just messaged me and said they lived across the street from each other in San Diego.
Okay.
The Putnams had a house nearby.
Okay.
So they were neighbors, if they, maybe whether or not they were friends. But I mean, if they were both kind of in these circles in society, I wouldn't be surprised.
Although the Putnam sisters are renowned for being really reclusive.
That's true.
They never really engaged in social activities, didn't invite people to their home. So I wouldn't be surprised if they lived across the street and didn't even know that.
Yeah, that's true. They were a little bit hermetic, maybe. Yeah, but these are great questions. Yeah, a few more thank yous from the comments. So I'll echo what they're saying. Thank you, Eleanor. And if there's nothing else, I think we might wrap up. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us for our little look at women's history through the eyes of our collection. We appreciate you being here. And just a reminder that we have these every week at 11 a.m. So you can always tune in through links on our website. So if you go to the events tab, there's always an event made and a Zoom link there. And then same thing if you're on Facebook, we always live stream these through Facebook. And if you ever can't make it at 11 a.m., we keep the recordings on our Facebook page. And I believe we've started putting them on YouTube too. So we have quite a few on YouTube. If you missed any from the last few months and you're wanting to watch more, you can go on our YouTube channel. You can search Timken Museum of Art and that should come up. And so you can watch old tours. So thank you again, Eleanor, and thank you to our audience for watching, and happy Women's History Month, everyone.